Hi, my name is Rooney Matson, and I am a student at Truman State University. This book talk is meant to actually work as a third part of my project that I'm doing over prizing in children's literature. I am studying the Flores-Tical Strauss Award and Ada's Violin, the story of the recycled orchestra of Paraguay by Susan Hood, won in 2017 for the younger readers category. A little bit about the award is that the Flores-Tical Strauss Award prizes nonfiction in children's literature that highlights inspirational leadership and other qualities that they want the younger audience to take away from it. A lot of these books include discussing racial segregation, Jim Crow laws. We have a few different biographies about inspirational figures, different child labor laws, and historical events. The Holocaust has a few books in there too. And I felt very drawn to Ada's Violin because it has a little bit more representation for me, a previous orchestra student, as well as the issue of recycling and inspirational motive that Ada really carries throughout the book. So throughout this book talk, we'll discuss like the plot of the book, as well as like Ada as a main character, and then kind of go into different elements of lessons, the history of the book, and like where it really derives from, and some like vocabulary, as well as like sources to find and help you as educators, parents, of any sort to really explore this book further. So Ada's Violin really discusses the story of Kathagura and how it formed the recycled orchestra that later goes on to explore various parts of the world and give these children hope and motivation, as well as the people themselves. So the story opens up with Ada discussing how the gancheros, or recyclers, look through the trash every time that garbage trucks rumble by and drops them. For her, she doesn't view this trash that she basically lives in or next to in the city of Katigura as trash. She views it a lot more as like a place for hidden treasures to possess. And she then goes into a little bit of her everyday life, as well as like how her family has created impressions on her. She talks about how her grandpa and her grandma really gave her a lot of musical influence, and she really fell in love with the sound of the violin on the radio. Then her grandma decides to sign her and her sister up for this new project, an orchestra with donated instruments led by Senor Chavez, and they are instantly in love with this idea. However, when they get there, they realize there's a lot more children than there is for instruments, and these children need to be practicing at home. So Senor Chavez is like struggling with an issue because he wants these children to be able to participate in the orchestra, but there's just not a lot of room and supplies, and he doesn't want them to deal with dangerous situations of carrying like very expensive instruments home when they could get mugged or robbed, especially in the situation that they're currently living in. So he comes up with a more brilliant idea to create instruments out of all of this trash that is surrounding them. He builds drums, violins, cellos from like everything around him, like a drum built from a old oil barrel and x-ray film. And Ada receives her violin through this. She is displayed with this beautiful violin that she makes music on that is all composed of different parts and pieces, and this really gets her into loving the orchestra even more because now she has a reason to play, she has a reason to like be there and gain inspiration. So then this gets really into more of like the orchestra itself portion of the book. She talks about how that violin and that orchestra practice that is like 3 hours each day and stuff like that, how it allows her to grow, develop more key teamwork skills, to find inspiration, to see like how the people of Katagura are inspired by having their children play music and lift them a little harder as they go to work. they end up becoming so good that they start traveling the world and get to go to different places. And Ada is ecstatic because she's finally getting to see new people and stuff like that. And then they ended up getting signed on for a deal with a rock band on tour. And Ada's a bit nervous when they go on stage in Bogota, Colombia, because she's never experienced this before. She doesn't know how to greet an audience. But when she gets up there and she's playing with all these people that she loves and this thing that has really created determination in her, she feels the full effect of the hope within her. She is just amazed by how something that they lived in and that basically puts them at a lower level almost has created something so beautiful and inspired so many people around them, and that almost is a representation for her and the other children in the orchestra, she felt like. And that is the end of the story. It ends on a high, hopeful note. So Ada as a character really showcases a lot of hope throughout the entire book, and I think that's why she was chosen to tell this story. She begins the book with this idea that the trash can be turned into treasures, and then later sees that come through as these instruments that she adores and she loves to play, and give her an opportunity to try something new and learn stuff, is then created and then like gets her out into the world. And it's all through this like idea that the trash holds treasures and can be built into something new, and that there's hope in everything. And I think that's why she tells the story so well, is as a main character, because she always sees the positive side, and for the reading level, it really works in the story. It also is like heavily reflected in the artwork. All of the pictures are done with like very bright colors, and like even the dark ones have hope and light because they're happy moments, such as listening to the radio in the dark, but having that light on their face and the smile and seeing the music play. So for this intended audience of 2 to 5, the book really works well. It doesn't have too heavily a vocabulary. I would recommend probably leaning towards the higher end of the book, just because there are larger passages of text that blend a little bit further into the actual backgrounds, and that can lead to maybe some people having issues reading it. However, like with a partner reading, it would work just fine. I think this book also really is nice for teaching in a library or at home with your children, or even in like a school classroom, because it talks about a lot of different topics well, and it is a very lighthearted, easy to read picture book story that is nonfiction. It does cover realistic events. So speaking of realistic events, some of the history that goes into this that would be really nice to maybe educate the audience on, either before or after, to kind of get the full effect. So this event is based on the creation of the orchestra in Paraguay, in Catacura specifically, which is a slum town sort of area right next to a landfill. And so Fabio Chavez actually is an engineer with a lot of free time, and he has a love for music. So he uses this to create this orchestra because he sees all these kids getting dragged to work or like not have anything to do, so they resort to like getting in fights or something. And he finds this in 2006. However, he quickly realizes there's not enough donated instruments for all the kids that want to join. And he leans on friends and himself to look into alternative solutions, and he has a bunch of people help him create these instruments for these students. And this leads them to getting well known. They start raising money, and this actually benefits the community itself, not only in cheering them up and giving them hope. It allows them to start building homes for these families and get like better situations, since they are right next to a landfill, and this causes like polluted waters and such. And so they're building homes for these families of these kids. This also kind of really brought attention to the idea of education in the community and allowed children to be a little bit more focused on learning things and not just being stuck in a position, because apparently from Chavez's point of view, that they used to really get dragged to work every day. He remembers seeing them and stuff like that. So this actually even led to a documentary on HBO Latino, or it was in theaters for a brief period of time, called The Lamb Philharmonic, just covering the events simply like similar to Ada's story. So because of this history, I think there is a lot to cover in this book that would be useful in lessons. You could do, obviously, a history lesson over this specific event. It also is a very nice way to maybe transition into some geography or South America cultural issues. If you're doing a lesson on South America and you want to focus on individual countries, or if you're studying Paraguay, perhaps you have students who are more relating to the content because they are from similar areas, or they just have a very similar background experience where they've lived their entire life, maybe coming from a lower income family, or even just a bad like town situation. It might be something that's very relatable to them, and you might recommend it as like a librarian if they're wanting something interesting as well as something to learn. I think it brings a lot of hope and inspiration, and that is just useful for kids in general. Obviously, Wyatt won the Florist Egal Strauss Award. There is also the underlying idea of like how the earth is handled and recycling, because it does mention in the book like there are like 1,500 tons of trash dumped there, and that there are like, it's just everywhere, it's causing issues. It really brings attention to the idea of like pollution and the fact that we are using so much of this, and the idea of recycling, because obviously the orchestra is completely recycled. They're bringing these instruments that they made out of trash, and I think that highlights that not everything we throw away necessarily is bad or good or anything, and that it can be used again. So this leads into a really well execution of maybe an Earth Day, or simply Earth awareness lesson. If you're doing anything like that, science, you could bring in some of the elements of like why having this landfill right so close can cause issues, and like how recycling can impact the earth, so that you allow the children to get more involved. You could also lead into lessons about like how your family recycles at home, and like doing that in class. There's also the idea of music. As a music teacher, or for students who are interested in music, this book really highlights like the power and brought from music and studying, and like why having that element of you is important. I actually leaned into this book for the music of element because I was a previous orchestra kid, and it was a good stress relief. It was a good educational experience for me, and I think that some kids could really relate to that. Along with lessons, there are a few different vocabulary words. However, for like the age range, the vocabulary is very simple, and I think overall well executed. But there are areas that you might like study with your kids to make sure they fully understand things, such as instruments, different types of instruments they list. This could lead into discussion questions of if they play any instruments, do they have any family who plays instruments? There is some Spanish words used, such as gancheros or recyclers. This leads to ideas of maybe talking about language differences and cultural differences, as well as just like the idea of recycling. You have tons and like a measurement of trash, and that could lead into different types of measurement to really understand the extent of how much trash. There's also produce used, and similar words to that might just be a good refresher, or a good like way to maybe insert using that a little more often in their vocabulary. Overall, I think that this book was really well executed for what it wanted to do. I think that there was a lot covered, and I think it was a very light story for something that may have come across as really dark or brooding or like a bad situation, and instead is just hopeful from the beginning and even more hopeful at the end. I really enjoyed the last page, simply hearing Ada's thoughts about why building this orchestra created not only a place for those instruments, but a place for them, and showing them that they have so much to hope for, so much worth in this world they might not have seen before. And I think that was really inspiring and touching to me. I also really just love the artwork in the story, because the book really has a nice blend of like a traditional art with some almost collage effects where letters look like they're cut out of a newspaper or a magazine, or like the music notes are like scraps of sheet music made to look like the music flowing out of the instruments or the radios. And I think that really emphasizes the aspect of recycling and the fact that this is built from waste and trash that people threw away, and seeing the new beauty in it. So as well, it talks about culture, lifestyle, and a lot of other elements. This is a very seemingly important aspect of history that I don't think I ever learned about until now, and that might just be useful for kids to find something that's more used to their experience. I am very thankful for your time. I will be linking some discussion questions as well as lesson plans in the description box, so please check those out. Thank you.